Good morning, everyone. My name is Councillor Heather Smith. I'm the chair of the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is taking place on Thursday, the 2nd of July, and it's being recorded live to the Council's website and will be available to view on YouTube for a minimum of 6 months. I'd like to give a warm welcome to everyone, to members, to officers, any members of the public or media who are watching this live feed this morning. I'd especially like to offer a welcome to Jo Bruton, head teacher at St John's RCVA School in Esh, who is the new faith representative on the committee and is attending her first meeting this morning. So welcome, Jo. Before I start the formal business of the agenda, I just want to go through some housekeeping issues for us to follow. I think most of you are familiar with these now, but I'll just remind you. All participants other than the chair, please keep your microphones on mute. And if possible, please blur your background. If you wish to speak, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen. And please type RTS, request to speak. Please remember that everyone can see the messages that are typed. When you're invited to speak by me, please remember to unmute your microphone. When you're invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name and your position, unless you've already spoken before in the meeting and have introduced yourself earlier. If my internet connection is lost, then the Vice Chair of the committee, Councillor Christine Potts, will take over until my connection is restored. If you're having any issues with the connection, with your connectivity, it's suggested that you try switching off the video and just using the telephone function. This will sometimes sort things. And if connectivity issues continue, then you may have to leave the meeting and rejoin it to get a better signal. So that's the housekeeping. At the start of our meeting, I'd like to recognise that this has been an extremely challenging time for our communities, and we want to express our condolences to the many families in County Durham who have lost loved ones and who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we will start the meeting. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Jackie?
We have apologies from Councillors Simmons and Wilson.
Thank you. Do we have any substitute members?
We have Councillor Wilkes for Councillor Simmons, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 2nd of March 2020. Hope everyone's had a chance to read them. Can we agree the minutes as a correct record?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? OK, thank you. We'll move on then. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Yes, Bev.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bev Cole, Esh and Witten Ward. I would just like to declare personal interest in agenda item 6B with reference to EHCPs regarding concerning a family member. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Bev. Item 5, are there any items from co-opted members or interested parties? Thank you. We then come to item 6, which is the main part of our agenda today, which is the update on the impact of COVID-19 on children and young people services in Durham County Council. And we have a report and a presentation from the Director of the Corporate Director of Children and Young People Services, John Pearce, and Richard Crane, the Head of Education and Skills. So I'm now going to hand over to John and Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start. So just to introduce myself, I'm John Pearce, Corporate Director, Children and Young People Services, and Richard Crane, who's Head of Education and Skills, is also with us. I plan, if that's okay with members of the committee, to take you through the presentation that's attached. There is a covering report, but I'll run through the presentation, really conscious that members will be particularly keen to focus on the time to ask questions, so I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but more than happy to pick up any issues that members have arising from the presentation as part of the question and answer phase. So could I move on to the next slide, please? Hello, Anne.
Anne,
Sorry.
is there a problem?
Yes, it's not loading up on my laptop. I'll give it another go. Has it loaded on your screens?
The first slide has loaded on our screens, yes.
My screen's blank.
Chair, can I just suggest that we just suspend the meeting for a short while, just until we get the presentation sorted.
OK, thank you, Jackie. Right, we will suspend the meeting for a moment and see if we can sort out this technical issue. Thank you. We can resume the meeting now, having sorted out the technical problems. So over to John Pearce, Corporate Director of Children and Young People Services.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to take you through an overview of both the impact and risks for Children and People Services through COVID-19, how services have responded, and then I also want to finish with just a couple of slides which have got some links in terms of information we've received in terms of feedback from children, families and schools during this period. So I'm going to take you through sort of section by section in terms of the remit of Children and Young People Services. So starting with child safeguarding and some of the risks that were identified, and these are risks both locally and nationally that have been identified during this period. So we know that there was a risk associated with vulnerable children not attending school. Early on in the pandemic, there was a reduction in safeguarding referrals and the impact of that. Because of the nature of the pandemic, we've had to reduce face-to-face visits with children and young people and their families. There's also been a significant slowdown, in fact a closure for a period of time around court work, which caused delay in progressing plans for children in care. And as a result of that, increases in the numbers of children in care, placing additional pressures on placement sufficiency and availability of placements. However, what we have seen is there's been no major impact on the availability of the social care workforce, which was one of the scenarios that we were planning for. So in terms of our response to those risks, all child cases have been risk assessed and visiting frequencies enhanced and monitored as a result of that. So during this period, children who are open to social care with a social worker have been seen more often than they would have been in normal times, and we've enhanced those visiting frequencies because of the broader risks associated with children being out of school. We've had a weekly monitoring system with schools looking at attendance and welfare checks to ensure that there is a level of contact with all children through this period. To help us manage our resources, we've been operating out of a 3-hub model because that's allowed us to operate from fewer buildings and close down a number of the smaller buildings that we've worked from. And that's also helped us to collapse some of our management structures. So we've had greater collaboration across our service areas as a result of that. As has been the case across all sectors, far greater use of technology. That has been both for the work and to keep staff in contact with each other, but also we've started to use technology far more in terms of how we interact with children and young people. We've also worked very closely with those children who are on the shielded list, and frontline staff have been aware and made appropriate arrangements for those children. Youth Justice Services have adapted to lockdown and they've introduced a virtual working approach alongside the range of other services that we have. We've also enhanced our work with partners, so we've had far greater data sharing through this period, which has had significant benefits, and that's been across areas like CAMS, substance misuse, young carers, and that's helped us have a really a clear picture of what's happening for children and young people in County Durham during this period. We've developed support to schools so that for those children who aren't open to a social worker but are just below that threshold that schools have concerns about, we've worked with schools to support those families as well, recognising the fact that the impact of the lockdown on those families presents potentially a risk to them. So we've done some additional targeted work there. We've had a weekly review of all of our performance information, and that's been able to target our responses. That's also helped with audit programme and making sure that we've got assurance around the quality of our work. And we're now working through Restart in terms of face-to-face family time for children looked after in their birth families, and that's a process that's been ongoing for the last month. We've also looked at far closer working between early help and statutory social care services with daily senior management meetings. And again, there's quite a lot of learning there that we want to take into the next phase, and things that have worked really well that we wouldn't want to lose. The next area I just wanted to touch on was children's residential services. So Park House, which is a respite facility for children with disabilities, was temporarily closed because of the specific risks around that facility. Aycliffe Secure Centre, there were some concerns around staff shortages and our ability to keep young people safe there, and we've put a range of mitigation in place to ensure that that hasn't been the case. across our children's homes. Again, some risk around staffing challenges, but all of our children's homes have continued to operate normal services throughout this period. And we've also been looking at the potential impact around the test and trace system, which is particularly a risk for children's homes and secure centre because of the nature of the self-isolation process for staff within those settings. So looking at our response and what we've done, so all of the children who would normally have attended Park House for respite have been risk assessed, and where necessary we've looked at alternative arrangements through community support, and we're just in the process at the time this presentation was written. We were just starting the reopening phase. That's now underway, so we've started a phased reopening of Park House. Aycliffe Secure, initially there was some reduced capacity, and that was done just by halting admissions at that time, and that enabled us to stabilise and work with those young people who were resident within the secure centre, and that's now started to progress, and we've started to increase numbers back up to normal levels again. To enable us to do that, we had a huge staff training and redeployment programme for our children's homes and for Aycliffe Secure, and redeployed a number of staff with appropriate training into both children's homes and into Aycliffe. We've also looked at how we've continued to develop additional provision. We're in the process of setting up 2 additional children's homes, one of which has been going through the process during this phase. Moving on to special educational needs, one of the biggest risks here is that we know that the overwhelming majority of children with special educational needs and disabilities have not been attending school during this period. We've also had some challenges around sustainability and the offer from some of the independent providers. So for some of those, particularly the independent providers who have been out of our area, and we've had to work quite closely with them around the offer that they've had in place. As a starting point, again, we undertook risk assessments alongside schools for all children with education, health and care plans. That was to inform how support could be provided either through return to school or through the environment at home. We've monitored very closely those 10 children who were placed with independent providers. As I said, many of those were out of county, and we've looked at individual arrangements around each of those children and young people. We've also provided advice and support to schools across the sectors on a range of issues around inclusion, vulnerable learners and transition. And we've worked on a regional basis, and this is again with a particular focus on those independent providers, because they will have children and people placed with them from across the region. So we've taken a regional approach to how we've worked with those settings. We've continued to work on new education, health and care plan requests and annual reviews wherever possible. Clearly there have been significant challenges with that because it needs a range of professionals from across local authorities, schools, health, to pull those plans together, and particularly for some of our health colleagues, and with schools not being fully open, there's been particular challenges around how we do that. The SEND partnership, which oversees all of our activity and support for children and people with SEND, has continued to meet virtually and has continued to have oversight on all of these issues. One of the key factors and impacts is and will be around child poverty. For reasons that will be well evidenced, we do expect a higher degree of poverty impacting on children both during this phase and beyond COVID. The impact of loss of parental employment, impact on reduced family incomes and reduced employment opportunities will be significant. We also expect there will be an increasing number of young people not in education, employment or training. That figure is currently 5.9%, but all of the indicators suggest that there is a significant risk that will increase significantly over the coming months. We're also looking at a potential increase in 18 to 24-year-olds claiming universal credit. The numbers are there on the slide, and we know through all similar economic downturns there's a disproportionate impact on the opportunities for those age groups, and a significant impact on youth unemployment as a result. Our work for adult learning and adult employment through the Durham Works scheme has continued to be really strong, and they work very closely with young people on recruitment and progression into employment and training. So moving on to some of the work that we've done through our early help services. So early help services through community hubs have continued to support the needs of communities, and they provided a whole range of support in terms of food, finance, activities. We've also continued to work with schools to support them to ensure that children on free school meals continue to receive lunches, vouchers, food parcels, etc. And that was a particular risk early on in the process, prior to the national voucher scheme coming into place, and even subsequent to that, there were some very well documented challenges with the national free school meal voucher scheme, and that's meant that for many of our schools they've had to continue working on bespoke arrangements, and we've supported them to do that. Early help provided a whole range of family activities, things like online cooking sessions, budgeting support, relationship support, promoting credit unions. Holiday activities were provided during Easter, and we're currently well underway in terms of the plans for holiday activities to take place and to work with our AAPs for the summer holidays. Durham Works, as I mentioned, continue to support young people through phone, text, email, and a whole range of virtual activity. So they've had about 14,500 interventions with young people just in April and May alone, which gives you an idea of sort of the scale of the activity that they've continued to operate. Some of the partners and subcontractors in adult learning have continued with online learning across a range of activities and working on employability skills and health and wellbeing support. We've increased our focus on supporting those vulnerable year 11s, knowing that they're going to transition out of school, and that transition point is always a risk, but in the current environment is even more of a risk. So looking at how we can provide some targeted support for them into further education, and we also continue to bid for additional resources, and that part of the system there is significant external funding and resource brought in to support the work that they do. So moving on to education in early years, the closure at the end of March for all schools across the county, with the exception of children of key workers and vulnerable children. There was a lot of work required in terms of supporting schools to manage that very swift lockdown process, but also to put in place arrangements to support those children who continue to go into school. One of the risks we had early on, and this is not just around education early years, was often the government announcement was then not followed up very quickly with guidance. So we had significant periods of time where we were being asked very legitimate questions by schools, by parents, but we were unable to answer them because the guidance hadn't followed the announcements. And also in the early years sector, there was a bit of a conflict between the furlough approach, particularly for our private settings, and the requirement for us to continue to provide an offer for children of key workers and vulnerable children. Despite that, over 240 schools continued to be open throughout this period, and that included throughout the Easter holiday period and also through the bank holidays during that time. And I'd like to place our thanks to all of the schools and the work that they've done. The leadership that's been shown across the education sector in Durham has been fantastic, and the commitment of staff to continue to provide education and support, both for those children who have been attending and have continued to attend, and also for those children who have been at home and supporting them with online learning, has been fantastic. There has been a huge amount of guidance in this area, and guidance that's been updated on a very regular basis. So one of our roles has been about facilitating the schools and supporting them around that guidance and translating what it might mean at a local level. And I can't underestimate just quite the level of guidance that has been. It has been really, really substantial. We've also had significant planning across the sector, working with schools, with trade unions, with public health and safety on schools' wider reopening. and that included us providing clarity on the council's position, which has been absolutely to place the safety of children, young people and staff at the heart of everything that we've done, and the expanded opening from the 15th of July, 15th of June has been very successful, and I think that is as a result of the very detailed planning that took place, and some of the advice that was provided from the council in terms of how that should operate. We've also continued to work with the Department for Education to understand and discuss national position, to feed back local implications and challenges, and to present challenge back around sort of some of the challenges on the ground that weren't necessarily being reflected at a national level. We've done some really strong work around promoting resources for schools to support the mental health and emotional well-being of children and young people. That's been led by our education psychology team, and they provided a whole range of resources to schools to use to work with children as they've come back into school. We've also now distributed over 1,400 laptops provided by the Department for Education and allocated to children who have a social worker. We haven't yet received the laptops for those disadvantaged pupils in Year 10, and that's the case also for those Year 10 pupils. The laptops will go via Academy Trust for those secondary schools that have academies, which is the majority of our schools. So that's the next phase that's coming forward, but we've already had and distributed around 1,400 to children who currently have a social worker. We also put a range of support in around early years, so the free flexible entitlement, which enabled the funding arrangements for childcare providers to help them to remain open. And we've also promoted the availability of early years provision for key workers and parents with vulnerable children, and we've had a really successful signposting mechanism to ensure that those who require it have been able to access provision that they need. So just the final couple of slides, I just wanted to highlight, I'm not going into any detail on this, but some of the feedback and some of the work that we've done with families. So we are developing a celebration tool which pulls together all the creative things that have happened, and there's some amazing examples of things that have happened over this period of time and work that we've had, things that have been shared with us by children, young people and families that we're pulling together into a central source. There's also an infographic which looks at both the feedback and the range of services that continue to operate, and there's a link on the slide to that. We have a quote there from a young person who's been accessing Durham Works through this period of time. And again, some of the feedback that we've had from children and families has been really excellent. We also carried out a survey across social care and early help, where we had 151 responses for families, and you can see on the slide some of the feedback that we got there and the responses that we got, which I think recognise the fact that we've been able to maintain contact and provide a level of service despite the challenges that have been there through this period. And the final link is the local offer link, which was updated and continues to be updated to show the offer that's available during this period. So finally, just in terms of some next steps, we're currently focused on restoration and recovery. We're not really moving into a recovery phase, we're moving into a living with COVID phase. And as we've seen in Leicester over the last few days, there will continue to be bumps in the road as we do that, and we need to be able to plan and manage those if they do occur locally. Reopening schools is a real high priority, and we've put a huge amount of work into that. We are expecting guidance to be published today for September, so we'll be working through that guidance and working with schools to look at the implications of that and what it means in a practical sense. And we've also started to expand our face-to-face contact with children and families, and things like family time, things like visits from social workers will more and more be face-to-face over the next couple of months. However, it's important that where we can continue to use technology effectively and where that has worked really well. And in some cases, particularly some of our interactions with young people who may feel more comfortable working through technology, there's been some really positive stuff there, and we don't want to lose that as we move into the next phase. So happy to open up to questions, and Richard Crane is also with me, so if there's specific questions around schools or early years, I'm sure Richard would be happy to pick those up as well.
Thank you very much indeed, John, for that very comprehensive overview of what's been happening in the county. If you'd like to ask a question, please type RTS in the chat function, and a question, Councillor Wilkes, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I thought someone was before me. I'm acutely aware that we're a rural county, although frequently we don't get the funding that we should have as a rural county. In fact, the government sometimes thinks we're not a rural county. I've seen estimates that the school transport budgets could need to be 4 times their current rate, and I think we're currently spending about £13 million on home to school transport. So there's a risk here that we need to find another £39 million for home to school transport provision. And I'm just wondering if officers can give us any indication as to whether those figures are accurate, and how we're going to manage in terms of bubbles and distancing, which you can't do with children trying to get them to and from school very easily at all. And also that we don't have potentially the capacity there within the transport system to actually operate this. And I'm just wondering how much do we have to reduce distancing in terms of the home to school transport system in order for us to be able to actually get the vehicles we need, but also to be able to afford to do this. And then of course, the more we reduce it, the more risk there is. And in a lot of cases, parents won't want to see that. So I'm wondering if you could give us an idea, John, as to where you think we are with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. It is one of the most significant risks we have in the next phase. We've raised this issue directly with the Department for Education. It's also been raised nationally through the Association of Directors of Children's Services. The figures, the estimates that you talk about were based on the 2 metre social distancing. So we have a protocol based on that 2 metre social distancing that does effectively reduce capacity by about 1/4 on transport. So if you take that to its natural conclusion, yes, it would cost us 4 times as much, and we would not have the capacity. Based on the current guidance and working to 2 metre social distancing, we don't have capacity, and we will not be able to meet our statutory duties in September if that is in place. We've made that very clear to the Department for Education. What we don't know yet is what impact the 1 metre change or the 1 metre plus change will make to that. We also don't have any specific guidance which we've requested on school transport. So there is guidance around public transport and the mitigation that could be put in place in public transport. At the moment, in terms of school transport, the guidance merely says that the department will consider options with the local authority. So it is an area that needs to be resolved at a national level. It's not an area that we can resolve in Durham ourselves. I would expect there to be some significant movement over the next couple of weeks in terms of updated guidance, because the current guidance predates the announcement around the change in terms of social distancing that was made week before last. But it is something that is a significant risk, and you're right, even if funding was not an issue, and clearly a £39 million additional pressure is a very significant issue. The capacity wouldn't be there to provide the transport that's required, and as I said, we've made that really clear to the department, and we need to understand what's going to happen at a national level around that.
Chair, could I ask a quick follow-up on that, if that's okay?
Quickly, please.
Yeah, it is quick. Yeah, it's just in terms of to what extent we might get any feedback from parents as to which ones may decide, and not everybody's in any means capable of doing this, of actually getting their children to school themselves, to what extent that might assist. There's some parents who simply won't be able to do it. There'll be others who may well insist on it.
Yeah, and there are a range of things we can do. So for those children who are eligible for transport through the statutory guidance, there is an option around things like personal budgets, so we could provide support to parents or family members to enable that transport to be undertaken. We don't know what the level of take-up would be around those sorts of issues. What we are seeing at the moment is where children are going back to school currently, there's a mixture. So some parents are transporting children directly, but clearly, many parents may either be working at home or furloughed at the moment, so they have capacity to do that. In the future, that might not be the case. I think, yes, there are some things we can do to mitigate, but I think it would be fairly small scale in terms of the impact it would have on the sorts of problems that we're talking about.
Just on the back of that, John, if I could come in, if that's okay, it's Richard.
Yes, please, Richard.
Just schools on an individual basis have had really detailed dialogue with parents around potential return, both during the summer term, and I know that they're working towards systems to ascertain numbers that are going to be coming back in the autumn term as well.
Thank you, Richard. Ivan, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, John, for your presentation. Chair, I have a question here, and I have subsequent ones, but I won't come in with the subsequent ones and if someone else addresses them as the meeting progresses. John, I'm very interested in the technology side of things. We've been very dependent on technology throughout this whole crisis, and I'm just wondering sort of how effective it has been, and what the challenges have been, and how we have addressed those challenges. And I think especially in terms of the quality of service, how have we been able to maintain a quality? Because there's quite often suggested that the quality of decision making is not as good from through virtual means. So I'd just like your views on that, please.
Yeah. I think in terms of technology, the challenge has probably been more for staff than for the people that we work with. So actually, and it's logical if you think about it, that for children and young people, they are far more used to working with technology and to interacting through technology. So it is an area where I think it has potentially huge benefits going forward. That needs to be risk assessed and age appropriate. But we do know that through this period, some of the young people that we work with, we've had far more engagement with them than we've been able to get through face-to-face type approaches, and they've actually opened up far more through technology than they would have done otherwise, and we've used a really wide range. I think in terms of how well it's worked, the technology has been fantastic. I think if somebody had have told me when we first went into lockdown the technology would have worked as well as it has done, I wouldn't have believed them. It has worked exceptionally well, and I think because there was no alternative, people have adapted to the technology extremely well, and we have. I think it has been the biggest single benefit through this period in terms of ways of working that we would want to keep, and particularly how we interact with young people. So what was the second?
Sorry, John. I asked about how the quality of the service had been maintained, because there is a criticism that quite often decision making is not as good using technology as it might have been in a face-to-face situation.
I think that technology has worked far better for that type of working as well. What it's enabled us to do is spend much more time and much more focused time on decision making than we would do normally. So, for example, our children's social care and early help managers have had a 1 hour catch up every morning all the way through this period. They've been able to discuss key issues, been able to progress them far more. We've brought in key members from other areas like the leads on education psychology and special educational needs and disabilities. On a weekly basis, they are then also joined by partners. So we've had fantastic attendance from partners, from police, from health services as part of that. So what it has done is allow us to be to be more focused, but also to get everybody in one place at one time in a way that, given the geography of County Durham, when you try and do that physically, it just doesn't work. And again, that is something that we intend to take forward as we progress, and I think we will continue to take forward. And I think it's actually helped, and all of the staff surveys, the feedback we're getting is that in terms of things like collaboration and how we work together, that has been significantly enhanced through this period, and technology's enabled that. Thanks very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Please can I remind people, if it's the first time you're speaking in the meeting, to introduce yourselves. Thank you. Next question, please, from Bev Colt.
Thank you, Chair. One's a comment and one's a question, if I may, Chair, please. John, thank you for the presentation. I would love to echo your thanks to the people who worked in the schools. I'm linked to 4 schools, and I think they've all done an absolutely phenomenal job since the start of this shutdown. I really do. I think they've gone way, way above and beyond in many, many cases, and I just want to echo those thanks. Secondly, it's a question, if I may, please. Yes. It's regarding the mental health and well-being of the children and also the staff within the schools. John, you touched on this promoted resources that have gone into the schools to support the returning children. What about those children, please, who aren't actually back at school yet? What can we do to support those, and also the staff as well, if I may ask that, please? Yeah. Thank you.
So certainly, I mean, in terms of the resources, I talked about that in terms of the returning children, because some of it is focused on that sort of transition and risk, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been used with children more broadly. We do expect there to be some really significant risk as children start to come back into school around ongoing mental health and well-being, and we're working both regionally and nationally to look at programmes of activity to develop this. We had a really good conversation last week with regional colleagues around this, and the importance of ensuring that the support is pitched at the right level. So quite often when we talk about mental health, we talk about clinical interventions, and actually what we're talking about in these circumstances are far more of a preventative universal offer that supports children, and also is in place to support staff, and you know, we have a range of activities through our HR infrastructure that staff are able to access to support their mental health and well-being. But it is looking at sort of the breadth of options that are available using the expertise that we have, because we do have some really fantastic expertise in the system. Our educational psychology service are fantastic, and they've developed and led the development of a lot of the resources that are there, and they will continue to do that as we progress. But ultimately we need to work as a partnership and bring all of our key partners in to look at a long-term plan around children and young people's mental health and the impacts of COVID on that. It is highlighted as a significant risk, and it is an area that we're really focused on to progress with. And I think come September, there's going to need to be some quite intensive support and resources available to enable children to transition back and for us to mitigate that impact.
Chair, could I add something in on the back of that? Would that be okay?
Yes, please, Richard.
Just in terms of some of a huge amount of resources have been put together by the education and EdSite team. Probably the biggest one, though, is the Happy, Settled, Safe document, which schools are using, which has a heavy emphasis on mental health and well-being, but also on transitional arrangements as children move between schools and between year groups. I know that within schools as well, they've got very rigorous systems where staff will be contacting pupils that they feel are most vulnerable, to check in with them on a regular basis around not just their academic progress, but also their mental health and well-being as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Olwyn, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Olwyn Gunn. I hold the portfolio for Children and Young People's Services with the Council. I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, to say thank you to again to all of the people who have been working in schools, all of our staff. They have done a magnificent job. I have written to head teachers on 2 occasions to thank them and the staff for all of their work. But I did just want to underline, Chair, some of the things that John has said about what's been happening over this period of time when schools have never been closed, in fact, because they've been open for, as you know, for vulnerable children and the children of key workers, and also the way in which they have been actually dealing with all of that. John emphasised the amount of guidance that was coming from government, and indeed some of it was coming in the early hours of the morning, and having to be translated and put into practice within 2 or 3 days. It's been an extremely stressful period of time for schools in a variety of ways, but the resilience of the staff has been quite extraordinary, and I know that we would want to recognise that. Can I just say as well, because I think that, I mean, John and Richard's come in as well and identified and described in great detail all of the work of Children and Young People's Services over that period of time. I would like to say, and it sort of answers Councillor Jewell's question as well, in terms of meetings and what we're doing. Can I say it was sort of like a little blip for us in terms of our timetable of meetings, because we have been holding meetings. I have had meetings with the heads of service in Children and Young People's Service and John Pierce, the director, as regularly as I was having them prior to all of this happening, and indeed having a written briefing from John every Friday on all of the issues. So as far as the participation, my participation has been concerned, it's been much the same as normal, actually, open as usual, as they say. But I cannot stress enough the detail of the work that's been going on and the way in which our staff have actually stepped up to the plate and dealt with all of the changes, the many, many changes, almost on a daily basis that have been taking place. So I'm really grateful to them for that. And I did actually thank as I said, the 2 letters that have been sent to head teachers, but also at the schools forum earlier this week that we had there. And the work goes on, and I totally support John when he says that we're living with this COVID-19 phase now. We're not in a recovery phase. There are many, many things that we must continue to help and support with. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Olwyn. Councillor Wilkes.
Yeah, I just first of all just wanted to thank Councillor Gunn while she's here in Scrutiny, just in terms of the updates that she's provided to us during the past few months, and also for what I'm pretty sure has been some robust pressure on government over quite a while now in pushing for extra funding in terms of children's services. And we have got very serious pressures across the board in children's services from a financial point of view. And as I said, at the moment, it looks like that's potentially not going to get better in the near future. But I wondered whether, off the back of what Councillor Jewell was mentioning there about technology, whether any of the officers have identified any possible savings going forward as a result of the technology that we've been testing and using, which might help with some of those pressures, whether there's any different ways of working, of communicating with regards, whether it be in looked after children or whether it be in those children in the community or any other departments, where there might be some opportunities there to help with some of these pressures so that we can protect those frontline services that we need to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wilkes. I think there will definitely be some opportunity to be more efficient in how we use our time and how we use our staff time around the way in which we interact with families. And given our geography, you know, there are potentially some savings associated with that. Whether they are material in the context of the level of challenge and cost, and our big areas of cost, which are around children in care placements and home to school transport. I think we'll be talking relatively low proportions in that broader context, but they're clearly things that we need to look at, and if we can work more efficiently and have a better outcome for children and young people, and that's absolutely something we should be doing. But the key pressures are going to be around access to services, costs of children in care placements, and they're not things that technology is necessarily going to help us with.
Thank you. Councillor Croot, please.
Thank you, Chair. Rob Croot, Councillor for Blackhall. I'm also the Chair of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board at Durham County Council. I recognise that there have been some huge challenges for schools, for the staff and for the children, and I think the service has borne those pressures really well from the advice we've been given this morning. My question relates to two specific groups of children, those in year 6 and those in year 11. Now, we know how important year 6 is in terms of transition, but what have we done to aid that transition from primary school to secondary school, given that they don't have that physical contact that previous years they would have had? And secondly, in relation to year 11, how far and how well equipped are schools to advise current year 10s going into year 11 next year in what the offer is going to be and what they'll be able to do, you know, leading up towards the GCSEs? Have we had any guidance or any advice from central government in how schools will be well equipped to take years 10s into year 11 in September?
John, I'm happy to pick that up if you like.
Do you want to pick that one up, Richard? Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of, good morning, Councillor Croot. In terms of year 6, the schools have been very, very creative actually in terms of adapting what would be their normal transitional arrangements to support young people as they move into secondary school. Some examples would be virtual visits to school. So I know of numerous schools where the head teacher's kind of done a walkthrough of a school and different classrooms and different areas within the school to familiarise year 6s with their new school. A conversation with form tutors, for example, and subject teachers as well, again virtually online, to enable young people to familiarise themselves with what it's going to be like moving into a new school that almost certainly will be operating some form of social distancing as well. I know that much of the information handover between primary and secondary schools that would happen as part of transitional arrangements in normal times has still happened. So as well as the academic information, the key pastoral information around students' specific needs, individual needs, has been transferred over to secondary schools in the normal way. In terms of the current year 10 going into year 11, there's been some stuff in the national media around some schools potentially not being able to offer the breadth of subjects that they might have done due to the implications of COVID. However, I know that schools have got a commitment to make sure that they will be able to be delivering the GCSE courses that students have started in year 10 into year 11. Now, they may well be delivering it in slightly different ways, and it may well be a mixed or blended way of delivery, some online and some face-to-face, but the commitment will be there to deliver those qualifications that the pupils have started.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Can I ask a question, please? Do we have any information about what has been happening to private nursery provision across the county through this crisis? Because early years is absolutely vital for children, and there have been reports that despite furlough schemes and support, that private nurseries are really going to struggle, and that the places and provision will shrink. Do we know what's been happening?
I can start, and I think Richard may want to chip in as well. So through our early years team, we've had a really good picture across the board of the individual challenges for all of our nurseries, BVI nurseries, nurseries connected to schools, and what we have done throughout the period we've had an offer that has met all of the need. So we've had a couple of examples where we've directed to our own internal provision at Selby Cottages, but actually the provision, and we've had probably higher levels of nurseries staying open than anywhere else in the region, and they've been able to meet that demand. And we have had a number of nurseries who took advantage of the furlough scheme and therefore haven't been open. We have been really flexible with funding, so that's enabled other nurseries to pick up the slack where children of key workers or vulnerable children needed to access. So there has been an offer there for everybody, not necessarily at the nursery they were accessing prior to lockdown, but there has been an offer there for everybody. Going into the next phase, we had some guidance came in yesterday that will be looked at and will have some implications for provision from September. We do have a sustainability fund in County Durham, and we have used this over the last couple of years with nurseries to maintain sufficiency of placements where that's been required, and also provide a whole range of advice and guidance around that into the nursery sector. And so we are starting to see some nurseries coming forward to talk to us around sustainability and to put bids in towards that sustainability fund as we move forward. At the moment, we think we're able to mitigate the risks that are there, but clearly it's a position that will keep changing, and I think particularly as the furlough scheme starts to taper off, there are some risks there. But I think certainly talking to colleagues regionally, we're probably in a better position in terms of our capacity and availability and sufficiency of places than most areas are.
Thank you. Richard, did you have anything to add, or has John been comprehensive?
No, John's covered it.
Right, thank you. At the moment, nobody else is requesting to speak. Are there any further questions anyone would like to ask for John and Richard? In that case, thank you very much indeed, Richard and John, for your presentation, and again, thank you to all the staff in children's services and in education who I think have been going the extra mile day in, day out to maintain services for children, and I think we're all very grateful to them, so thank you. If we move on then to item 7 on the agenda, which is the refresh of the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme for 2020 to 21. And we have a report which Anne Whitten is going to present.
Thank you, Chair. Anne Whitten, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. Overview and Scrutiny Work Programmes are designed to be flexible to accommodate items that may arise throughout the year. Flexibility is an essential feature of the proposed 2021 work programme to enable scrutiny to respond to the changing landscape of the COVID-19 pandemic. The proposed work programme is being framed around the COVID-19 pandemic and in the context of the new Shared Vision 2035, which is being developed along with partners around 3 strategic ambitions: more and better jobs, long and independent lives and connected communities. In addition to the County Durham Vision 2035, the scrutiny work programmes are informed by Council Plan, Cabinet's Notice of Key Decisions, Sustainable Community Strategy, Partnership Plans and Strategies, Performance and Budgetary Control Data, Changes in Government Legislation, Key Questions for Improving Performance, as well as the 4 priorities of the Council's Transformation Programme. Redesign our service to better meet customer need at reduced cost to the Council, help communities to become more resilient and self-reliant, to move our partnership working from good to great, to become renowned for our skilled and flexible workforce and our employee engagement. New regulations enable committee meetings to be held virtually, and to assist with this approach, we propose to keep our agenda short to ensure meeting time is focused on those matters which are of the highest priority. Where agreed by committee, regular overview reports will be circulated separately by email for information and comment. During the 2019-2020 work programme, the committee undertook, monitored, considered and reviewed items that fell within its remit, and at paragraphs 12 to 15 on page 33 of your pack, this work is highlighted. Looking forward to the proposed work programme for 2021, which can be found at Appendix 2 of the report on pages 36 to 42 of your pack, this gives an indication of those reports to be considered at formal committee and those to be circulated by email to committee members. As mentioned, flexibility is a key feature of this proposed work programme in relation to when reports will be considered, as dates may flex with additional demands on capacity of services during the pandemic. Members of the committee are asked to receive, comment and agree the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee work programme for 2020-2021 at Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Anne. Councillor Wilkes, you have a question?
I do. It's a clarification, possibly. Obviously, schools are facing problems at the moment in terms of isolation and making sure that their buildings are fit for purpose. Going back, I can't find a time in the last 5 years when there's been a proper review of the current capital backlog of repairs and maintenance within scrutiny, within the children's scrutiny. And I'm just wondering whether, given we've probably got 60-70 million pounds of backlog on repairs and maintenance, and probably hundreds of millions of pounds that our portfolio holder would want to spend on new schools as well, with no scrutiny of where we're at and not knowing what, there's probably schools out there in desperate need of extensions or of repairs to particular rooms that can't be used or whatever those issues might be. There's nothing within the scrutiny programme on this committee looking at school buildings and capital programme. Is there going to be something perhaps in overview and scrutiny corporate instead to look at this, or another scrutiny committee? Because if there isn't, then I think it's something that we really need to do to prioritise this, to make sure that all of the schools we've got are fit from a point of view of being dry and being big enough and being fit for purpose, given the pressures they've got at the moment with having to deal with the additional burden of dealing with distancing and bubbles and all the rest of it.
Yes, as I said to you, there is a detailed review going on at the moment, which is looking at educational provision, including buildings. And when that work has been finalised, it will come to this committee. Olwyn, would you like to say something about this? And then John, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about the delay there in unmuting. Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right in what you said, Chair, about the ongoing review. I'm sure that John will want to say something about that. And of course, we have been in a state of having no funding for some time now. In fact, since the Building Schools for the Future programme, which, as you know, was an investment programme of 55 billion, which was introduced in 2003 by the Labour government, when that was actually cut short, in fact scuppered by the Lib Dem Tory coalition government, then in fact what happened was that there was no further real investment in school buildings. So our young people were denied the privilege to actually learn in 21st century classrooms. And so, yes, indeed, but I think that what we have to do is to look at what is ongoing already, and we have been ahead in terms of not just reviewing what the education provision is in terms of teaching and learning, but also looking at what we have in terms of buildings. You'll be well aware as well, I'm sure, Councillor Wilkes, that there has been pressure been put upon government over several years now in terms of actually accessing funding for buildings refurbishment and indeed rebuilding. And we've had to take what was on offer, which was indeed very little. So, and accepting what the chair has actually said about going forward on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. John, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so just building on that, so the education review is covering a wide range of things. So it is looking at buildings, it's also looking at standards, sustainability numbers, etc. So it's taken a very system-wide approach to looking at all of the challenges around education and schools. I mean, in terms of capital funding, there are effectively 3 routes at the moment. So we get an annual allocation around school condition, which is for emergency works and for small health and safety and condition type building activities. And the allocation for this year was 4.8 million, which if you consider across an estate of 266 schools and if you take into account multiple sites, so that gets up to around about 290, provides a significant limitation in terms of funding. The other stream is basic need funding, and basic need funding is only for expansions. So it can't be used for school replacement or condition type activity. And actually, because of our pupil numbers and the pupil returns that we do, we haven't received any basic need funding in this financial year. We will be getting 1.4 million in basic need funding for next year. And then the third strand is the priority school build schemes, of which there's been two schemes, 2 programmes over the last 7 years. In the first scheme, and this is a school by school bidding process nationally, so this isn't money that comes through a local authority. This is money that for individual schools that are in urgent need of renewal. There's a national bidding scheme against a range of criteria, and we had 4 schools that were successful in round 1 of priority schools build and 3 that were successful in round 2. So we do know that we have got really substantial challenges across the school estate. There are a number of schools that we know that are in need of renewal or at the minimum some form of refurbishment, as well as the conditions backlog, which continues to grow because the allocation doesn't meet the full cost that's required. We're waiting to understand the detail of the announcement that was made was earlier this week around those schools, but because of the education review, we're in a really good position with that. So we know, and we've got very clearly evidenced rationale around those schools that are priorities, and we will be able to develop bids and proposals very quickly as that starts to come on stream, and once we have some detail associated with that. I should also make the point that a lot of this funding, and I think the announcement that was made earlier this week, was very much targeted at secondary sector, and in the secondary sector the majority of our schools now are academies, and academies have a different route for funding. So the Education Schools Funding Agency provides funding through Conditions Improvement Fund directly to academies, so that doesn't come through the local authority.
Thank you, John. Councillor Wilkes, is it another question about the same issue, or is it actually about something that's in the work programme?
Well, it's specific to the responses that were given by the officer who stated the 3 possible lines of funding for capital work. Just to clarify, because Councillor Gunn's predecessor, after pressure from Liberal Democrat councillors, because I didn't turn this political, she did, actually her predecessor, Councillor Johnson, actually brought forward funding direct from council money after we pointed out that for decades the council itself hadn't put a penny of its own funding into capital work. That is also an opportunity and an option there, that yes, the government may not be giving us enough funding, but if there are critical needs and we've got £224 million in reserves, we could be looking at what elements of that could be brought forward to actually be spent improving our schools, rather than always blaming the government, whilst I accept they're not giving us enough money. But if there's money there, and if there's a problem with repairs not being done and a massive backlog, Scrutiny should be looking at it within their work programme.
So, Chair, can I just clarify on that point?
Yes, please, John.
I was talking about external funding streams. So the council has invested through bids into the capital improvement fund for a number of school projects. So there are some new school builds that are coming through that have been agreed through that mechanism. So Boburn Primary, Ox Close, which has recently been approved, as well as some expansions and improvements. So my answer was in the context of external funding activities, but there is a route that has been used through the council's capital investment fund to enable some urgent works to be undertaken.
Right, thank you. I'm going to move this on now. Councillor Crute.
Thank you, Chair. In light of the comments that have been made by both the portfolio holder and the director, can I suggest, now that they've confirmed there's a review ongoing into educational provision, can we await the outcome of that so we then have an evidence base to work on, certainly when we're looking at targeting external funding? The watchword when we're setting the work programme has always been about flexibility. I think that's more the case now than ever before. I think we've built sufficient flexibility into the work programme for allow for that to have a look at that review into education provision at the appropriate time. So yes, it should come through scrutiny, but I think it should come through scrutiny at the right time when we have an evidence base there to look at.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Are there any further questions regarding the work programme, please? Nobody else has indicated they wish to speak at the moment. OK, thank you. In that case, we're recommended to receive and comment on the proposed work programme, which we have done, and agree the work programme with flexibility to respond to emerging issues, which I think we have. Is everyone agreed with that? Thank you. Item 8, any other business? I've not been informed of any other business. And so I think that concludes the meeting for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. Thank you.
Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.